What year were you in Beijing at that time?
In Beijing from 84 through until virtually the beginning of 87.
So what was it like then?
It was China at its most dynamic. It was China opening up to the world for the very first time, where all things were possible under heaven. And so this was almost the high days and holy days of China's international engagement. And it was fully 2 years before Tiananmen, which was the first great Leninist wake-up call.
And when, I think it's after this period, but when do you first come across Xi Jinping?
Well, it's interesting. When I was a junior woodchuck in the Australian Embassy at the time.
Is that a official term?
Increasingly, yes. And so basically the guy does the photocopying. So when I was there, our Prime Minister was visiting at the time, a guy called Bob Hawke. And Bob wanted to go to places other than Beijing. So we organised for him to go to one of the newly opening up cities, what they called a special economic zone at a place called Xiamen. So I went to Xiamen to do the advance work, and I met with the then vice mayor of Xiamen, who was a guy by the name of Xi, a given name Jinping, and that's where we first met. Was it a long and extensive, boozy dinner? No, but it was the first time I met the guy.
I've met a lot of politicians in my time for my sins. Sometimes you run across somebody and you can feel the gravity of history warping around them, right? First time I met Obama, you could feel the weight in the room.
Yeah.
It shifted things. Trump has this quality. There are people who have him, but people have had him early. I've met people early in their careers and they just have that quality. I've met other people who don't, even though they rise quite far. What was Xi like? Did he feel different to you than other mayors and vice mayors and party bureaucrats? Would you have told me after that meeting, I just met somebody and that young man is going somewhere?
Because I was a student of contemporary Chinese politics, I knew of his father, Xi Zhongxun, who was already a member of the Politburo. But I'd be fibbing to you if I said to you today that the room shook for me when I first met him. Much later on, when I was Prime Minister of Australia and he was visiting Australia as Vice President of China, and I remember sitting in front of the fireplace in the Prime Minister's residence in Canberra. It was winter. And spending a couple of hours over a glass of Australian red talking about the state of the world with him in Chinese. That's when I sensed that this was a man of history for the simple reason that all of his references were about his place in the context of unfolding Chinese history. So that's the first time in which I had that sense we were dealing with something, somebody, some person who was unique.
Say more on that. When you say that he referenced himself in the unfolding, what was he unfolding and what was his self-understood role? Because this was before he was leader of the party.
That's true. And when his position was still somewhat contested, it wasn't absolutely clear that he would become paramount leader. In the conversation, which, as I said, ran for a couple of hours, was free-flowing. We didn't have interpreters. And essentially his thesis was that China intrinsically is a great power, historically was demonstrated as such throughout a couple of thousand years of recorded history. Not the 5,000 that the Chinese often boast about, but just a couple of thousand. Which, given we're up to the 250th anniversary of the birth of this country as a republic, a couple of thousand is pretty good. And certainly measured against Australia, it's very good. But he saw that the trend of Chinese history was China was a great power when it was A, unified, and B, able to keep foreign adversaries under control and divided. And China collapsed as a great power when neither of those propositions held true. And so for those reasons, spinning it into the 20th century and then into the 21st century when I was meeting with him, he saw the contemporary mandate of the Chinese Communist Party, which is to maintain China's domestic unity and to keep it free from external pressure so that it could once again become a global great power. And that whereas he wouldn't say, quote, I, Xi Jinping, therefore have a unique mandate to do this on behalf of 1.4 billion Chinese people, close quote. For me, the subtext was pretty clear.
So she's a man with a sense of history, and also a man with a very particular history. You mentioned his father a moment ago. Tell me his story.
His father, Xi Zhongxun, is a fascinating figure in modern Chinese politics. So in the period of the party's crucible, which was when they had to retreat to a place called Yan'an in northwestern China, where they holed up effectively for the better part of 10 or 15 years. That's when Xi Zhongxun comes to the fore as a trusted military lieutenant in Mao's system. But Xi Zhongxun also runs through a period whereby he is repeatedly criticized and, in fact, purged by Mao, including during the Cultural Revolution, 66 to 76. And as we know from our study of human psychology, particularly in authoritarian states, such experiences of purges from the party center can either have one of two consequences. One, it makes you even more loyal to the party because you have recognized your errors through this process of criticism and self-criticism. Or the second is you turn absolutely hostile to the party as an abuse of Leninist power. Xi Zhongxun, Xi Jinping's father, was very much in the first category. In fact, he reminds me of that last scene in Orwell's novel with Winston, where he realizes as he disappears into oblivion that he loved Big Brother all along, and the party always comes first. That's where Xi Zhongxun fits. Despite being purged, always coming back to the party because the party knows best. A true Leninist.
I think Americans who hear that story, and given our particular culture, which has a bit less experience with purges and likes stories of people. When you were saying that, I was thinking about a number of people who have been purged or nearly purged from Donald Trump's Republican Party and having watched some of them go down alternative paths. So I agree with you so far. But I think we have a somewhat naive sense that the natural reaction is the second reaction. Hostility to the party, recognition of the tyranny. And even if you have to buckle under for a little bit, you're always plotting in your heart. So you imagine being the son of a person who is purged somewhat repeatedly, whose family in a way is humiliated by the party.
And has physically suffered.
And has
been sent down to the countryside and lived in quite impoverished circumstances for several years.
Xi Jinping was.
As a young Xi Jinping was.
So I think people imagine that would create a hatred. You're saying for many people it does the opposite. What did it do for Xi Jinping and why?
Well, my analysis is that Xi Jinping, like his father Xi Zhongxun, concluded ultimately that the party knows best and that the party ultimately has the nation's interests at heart. It's not to say that the party is infallible, they will make mistakes, but in the full sweep of history, that we owe our loyalty to the party. And you're right, most Americans would say this is just nuts. In fact, all Australians will think it was completely nutso, simply not within our realm of lived experience if you'd been treated that way. But there's something about Leninist induction which creates these veins of steel in these folks. And Xi Jinping is of that ilk. And so ultimately unemotional about these things, ultimately absolutely hard-headed, some would say cold-hearted, but absolutely resolute that this beast called the party is the engine which takes China into the 21st century, not just as a country barely surviving against the external predations of the West or whoever else, but on its trajectory to become a global great power. And that's why I always say to American interlocutors, never underestimate Xi Jinping. Never, ever underestimate him.